recording going. Okay. All right. I'll begin by saying that tonight's shiur, as usual, is Le'ilu Nishmat Avi Mori Dover Mered Nuven Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And tonight, even though tonight's we're talking about parshat mikaytz, we're going to begin with a short excerpt from parshat from last week's parsha of Yosef, because the focus I want to do tonight is really about the way the Torah describes the sons of Yaakov and the different ways we relate to Yaakov's children, and the people that we refer to as the Shvatim, the 12 tribes, and how they are, how the Torah looks at them. So if we look through last week's parsha and this week's parsha, we find that the bulk of last week's parsha deals with Yosef, and in reality, the other brothers almost seem to be sort of in the background, if you will. Good evening. I think the Torah is trying to focus us on the fact that, even though we are all descended from Yaakov, from these Shvatim, we don't know a whole lot about these Shvatim. And that's what I think really what I wanted to focus on. And I'm going to do it by starting with last week. Last week's parsha, the bulk of the parsha, as I said, deals with Yosef. And as a matter of fact, if we go back to the beginning of the parsha, it tells us Elah told of Yaakov at the beginning of Vayeshev, not in mikaytz here, where it tells us Yaakov's children are Yosef. It tells Elah told Yaakov, it says Yosef. It doesn't say Yaakov has 12 children, has 13 children. It says these are generations of Yaakov, Yosef, period. And it tells us about Yosef. What was Yosef doing? Now, you'll hear what I just so you'll know the color coding here. Green refers to Yaakov. Yaakov, remember, has two names here. Yaakov, sometimes he's Israel. And he really, at least in last week's parsha, is not a primary character. He will be a little bit more in this week's parsha. Gray refers to one of Yaakov's sons, either mentioned individually or mentioned by name. And purple means Yaakov's sons referred to as a group. This is the coloring that's the way the colors came out. But I wanted you to see that a number of times the Torah refers to Yaakov's children as a group, in a group setting rather than individuals. And that's really one of the primary focuses I wanted to develop tonight. So if you look at the story of Yosef, this primarily is, as I said, leading up to the sale of Yosef. This is last week's parsha. This is the chapter that talks about the sale of Yosef. Again, you'll notice it begins with Yosef hanging out, if you will, Vunar at Bnei Bilhav at Dezolpa, whatever that Vunar means, whether it means he was hanging out with them, whether it means he was leading them, charge of them, whatever. But the Bnei Bilhav and Dezolpa, they're a group. They're not individuals. It doesn't say. We know who the Bnei Bilha, they're Dan and Naphtali, Bnei Zilpar, Gad and Asher, never mentioned by name. They're mentioned as a group, these four sons of Yaakov. Yosef, as I said, mentioned prominently in this story, but the others, the brothers, not mentioned by name here at the beginning. Vayiro Echav, the brothers see, Vayisnu, Mikol Echav, Vayisnu, they hated him. V'lo Yaflu, they were not able. Again, we see the brothers are being dealt with by the Torah in this opening section of Vayeshev collectively, not as a bunch of individuals, but as a group. It's Yosef and everybody else. At least that's the way the Torah portrays it at the beginning. Again, as you see, I go through the whole thing. Yosef has these dreams. He talks to the brothers. The brothers are jealous of him after this. And then again, the brothers all go off to shepherd the sheep near Shechem. And Yaakov, I forgot to put the green here. See, that's what happens when I add something at the end. I forget to put all the colors in. Yosef here should be a gray. Again, to point out the fact that Yosef is mentioned by name throughout the narrative.
Why didn't he go out with him at the beginning?
I'm sorry?
Why does he hold back? Why didn't he go out in the beginning with all the...
Why doesn't Yosef go with them when they're going out with the sheep?
Yeah.
why Yosef seems to be, firstly, he's the youngest, except for Binyamin, who's like the kid. Again, I can give you the midrashic interpretation. He was the one who always was there to attend to his father. The other one is, hey, he was the favorite son. He was the privileged one. He didn't have to go out and work. He was the. Okay, so
We don't have
way you look
favorites.
at it, the Torah doesn't tell us why. It just tells us that that the brothers all went out as a group. The brothers, it's always the brothers and Yosef. Now you'll notice Binyamin doesn't even show up. We have no idea where Binyamin is at this point. But he's not part of the brothers, okay? And that seems clear. Okay, so Yosef, we know that Yaakov sends Yosef to his brothers. Now, I skipped a few psukim, but when he gets to his brothers, the first thing that happens is, it says, Vayomru ish el achiv. Now, it doesn't say the brothers all said to another. It says Vayomru, though it is a plural, should be in, but it's not dealing with the whole groups. It's one of them says to one of them. It's not el echav. It's not Vayomer Echad El Echav. It's not one of them said to all the other brothers. It's one says to a single one of his brothers. Now Rashi gives us the midrashic interpretation that this clearly has to be Shimon and Levi, because they are the two who are always referred to as a pair, as brothers. And we'll see that same phraseology, Ish El Achiv, will appear again in the story later on when they're in front of Yosef. But again, he says, let's do something as a group. Whoever this is, whether it's Shimon who is suggesting it or Levi suggesting it, it's let's do something as a group. Let's all collectively do something. Now, Reuven, here's their suggestion, and he says, no, we can't do that. So Reuven suddenly appears as an individual. He's split up from the group, and ultimately Yehuda splits away from the group and says, let's do something else. But again, Yehuda's suggestion is let's do something as a group. Okay, so again, we see Yehuda at one point here, he is making a suggestion. It's almost as if you look through these three psukim the groups that I put together, it's almost as though the four older boys are figuring out, what are we going to do with this problem here, guys? We got this big problem here. Yosef, he thinks he's going to be the ruler here. We got to do something about it. This is the perfect opportunity. We're alone. Dad's away. Whatever happens to him, Dad will never know. We can make up any story we want. Let's just get rid of it. And again, nobody seems to be taking a decisive point to say, let's do this individually. They all say, let's do whatever we're going to do together, except perhaps Reuven, who wants to kind of sneak away and save him. As the Torah says, Reuven wants to save him, but he's not able to find the opportunity to do it without whatever. We don't know what happens to him, but somehow he's able to make a suggestion that saves Yosef's life temporarily, but he can't get the job done to get him back home safely. And one suspects that even had he gotten home safely, the next time something else would have happened. There would have been other opportunities where the brothers would have had this chance to do something, clearly. Okay. So I just wanted to give that as a background to the sale of Yosef. The rest of the parsha, yet last week's parsha deals with what happens to Yosef after the sale, with, of course, the exception to what happens to Yehuda, which we're going to leave. And now we're going to go to this week's parsha. Okay. Now I'm specifically want to just first focus on the fact that the parsha of mikaytz, as I've tried to say before, when you read it in the Torah, there's one thing that comes out very, very prominently. There's no chapter breaks. From Yosef interpreting Paro's dream to the 7 years of plenty, the 7 years of famine, the brothers coming down, the whole interaction between Joseph's brothers, it's all one paragraph in the Torah, the entire parsha of mikaytz. But I'm skipping the first section, which deals with Yosef interpreting Paro's dream, the 7 years of plenty, and the beginning of the famine, because I wanted to focus here on the interaction between Yosef, Yaakov, the brothers. Okay. So we get it, but again, keep that in back mind that this whole thing is not, it's not a separate chapter in the way the Torah is written, where we would have thought, especially here, where the first section deals with Yosef in Egypt, and then we suddenly, starkly, and I guess the person who decided to put chapters in the Bible is some Christian guy who was printing the Bible up, decided to start putting chapter headings in, decides that this has to be a new chapter because what he calls chapter 41 is Yosef in Egypt, interpreting Pharaoh's dreams and the 7 years of plenty. And now we're in the years of famine, and suddenly, drastically, the scene has shifted from Egypt back to home. What's happening at home? We've left Yosef. We've had this whole discussion about Yosef, about being with Potiphar, being in prison, now being with Pharaoh. A lot of time has gone by, and we've heard nothing about what's happening to the rest of his family. And now suddenly, boom, starkly, without any, what's the word I'm trying to think of? What's the word I'm trying to think of? Transition. Without any transition, Torah just goes, Yaakov switches back, the scene switches to Yaakov. So in the beginning of this chapter, firstly, Yaakov sees what's going on. Now, the yellow I've highlighted because in these first few psukim, the Torah uses a number of different phrases to refer to the brothers. Now, again, the brothers here is the 10 brothers, the same 10 that we've had before. Notice the blue, Binyamin, is sort of off on the side. Blue, by the way, means a brother whose name is mentioned as an individual, but an entirely passive role, not doing anything, not involved. Somebody just mentioned that they're there. Okay, and that's, in this case, it's the narrator telling us that Binyamin didn't go down to Egypt with the brothers on the first trip down. By the way, how old is Binyamin at this point in time? Okay, he's younger than Yosef. How old is Yosef? Okay, Yosef is 17 when he sold. The parshat begin. If you go to the beginning of parshat mikaytz, it tells us that he's 30 when he's in front of Pharaoh interpreting his dreams. Add 7 years for the 7 years of famine, means he's at least 38 because we're in the first year of the plenty. 38, 39 is what Yosef is. Okay. When we're reading this right now, when the brothers come down, he is in his late 30s. Okay. Yeah, Yosef. Now, how old is Binyamin? Binyamin is 6 to 8 years younger than Yosef, and that puts him in his early 30s. Okay, so he's not, we all think, oh, Binyamin, he's this little kid. He's not this little kid. He's 30 years old, approximately, maybe 29, maybe 31, whatever, somewhere in that range. How old is Yaakov? In this story happens, Yaakov is now 130 years old. When he gets to Pharaoh, when he comes down next week, and Pharaoh's going to ask him how old he is, he's going to answer he's 130 years old. That's what he's going to tell him. So we have to assume he knew how old he was. I don't know. Maybe he was, he was faking it because nobody had his birth certificate. But okay, but Yaakov is not a youngster. He's 130 at this point in time. This could have taken 6 months, a year, we don't know, but somewhere in that range. Okay. So again, firstly, it says Yaakov says live enough to his children. So again, it calls them his sons. So there's this recognition that these are his sons. It doesn't say Yaakov. Which in the context of this verse, it makes sense that it says live enough. But then when he tells them to go to Egypt, it says Vayerdu achei Yosef asara. Very, very strange way of referring to the brothers here. We've had them referred to as the brothers so many times last week. All of a sudden, it switches and calls them achei Yosef, Yosef's brothers. The Midrash comments on that, by the way. The Midrash has a comment on that the brothers all had charata, and they regretted that they had sold him in the first place. And they said, hey, now that we got to go to Egypt anyway, let's see if we can find him and bring him home. That's because they suddenly had this feeling of brotherhood toward him after all these years had passed. I guess they had forgotten all of the
Aaron.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to check.
Yes.
I don't believe it was the brothers that actually sold him.
Who actually sold him is a discussion among the commentaries, and it hinges on a translation of a number of different pronouns. You're absolutely correct. There are different schools of thought as to whether the brothers actually physically sold him or they just put him in the place from where he was sold. But in any case, they certainly have a degree of responsibility in the fact that he ended up in Egypt. Whether it's direct or indirect is a discussion among the commentaries. Okay?
That's what I think, yeah.
Okay. All right. So again, in Pasuk Gimel, suddenly they've switched and they've become achei Yosef. Then in verse 4, it says Achav with his brothers. Binyamin is not sent with his other brothers. And then suddenly in verse 5, we have first time here by Yavohu b'nei Yisrael. the sons of Yisrael. Okay, instead of being called B'nai Yaakov, they're called B'nai Yisrael. First time we see this appellation being used for a group of people. An interesting thought that we've gone from being Achei Yosef to B'nai Yisrael. Now again, what do each of these things signify? Good question. I don't have great answers. I try to give you a little bit, but I think B'nai Yisrael is the fact that they've now become a group. I think that's very clear from the whole purple that we showed before, and you're going to see how much purple we're going to have here, that they are a group. They're acting as a group, and that's clearly what they're doing in Pasuk Hey. They've come to buy food, plain and simple. So they're B'nai Yisrael. They're a group. Now, from here on, we're going to switch to Yosef on one side, the brothers on the other side. So the brothers come, they get into Canaan. Who is in charge of selling food? Yosef. Okay, Yosef hu hashalit al haaretz, verse 6, hu hamashpir l'chol am haaretz, and Yosef is the one who they have to come to. There's only one address to come in Egypt for food. That's Yosef. By Yavo Achei Yosef, again, back to being called Achei Yosef. They're no longer B'nai Yisrael, they're back to Achei Yosef. Because why? Collectively, they bow down to him. Reminds us very much, of course, of last week's parsha where we were talking about bowing down. That was the only verb that we had in that was common to the two dreams of Yosef, was this word of bowing, the word to bow down. Okay. Now Yosef recognizes the brothers, but again he recognizes them not as Achei Yosef, as perhaps the ones who wanted to harm him, but as Achav, his brothers, Vayakirem, and he recognizes them. Of course, they don't recognize him at first, and the whole discussion as to whether they knew who he was or not is a whole different discussion. But again, he decides to ask them where they're from. Again, Vayomru. Notice there's no spokesman here who gets up. The Torah does not identify who is the spokesman for the brothers. It seems they all answer, we came from Canaan. They're coming as a group, and they're standing in front of this guy who they have no idea is Yosef, at least at this point, and they are explaining, we just came to buy food. Okay? He asks where he came from, they answer him. Okay, again, the Torah then repeats, Vayaker Yosef et Achav behem lo hikiru. The Torah repeats the fact that Yosef recognizes him. And again, calling them Achav, his brothers. The Midrashim want to say that this tells us that Yosef recognized them. What the one mentions is that first he recognized them because they all came together, and he says, "Oh, I know these guys." And then the second is he recognizes who each one individually is. I don't think they were wearing COVID masks, so I don't know why he would have had COVID. But again, when he left them, they were all in their early 20s. 20 years have passed; they're all in their mid 40s. So it may take, especially if we assume that they probably looked alike, it takes a minute for him to figure out who's who. Okay, let's even just grant that. Others say that the reason that it has the second one is to remind us that he recognizes them, even though they've harmed him, he recognizes them as his brothers. And so everything that he's going to do, which to us might seem harsh and might seem unbrotherly, is done in with the brotherly love. And that's what we have to try to understand. What was it Yosef's trying to get at? Totally separate discussion. Okay. Again, it says that Yosef remembers the dreams and he accuses them of being spies. Again, notice the response. It's all in the group. It's the group. Vayomer love. They all say, no. All of us, we came to buy food. We are all from one family. We are true people. We are not spies. He says, no, you're spies. And then they volunteer more information. But again, they're all talking as a group. There's no spokesman who's stepped forward and says, I'm going to represent the group. At least that's the way the Torah is portraying it at this point. By Yomer, they say, yes.
Sorry, when they were told to go into the town, they were told to go as separate people, no connection to each other.
Midrash. Okay, yes, yeah, that's absolutely a wonderful.
And now all of a sudden they're identifying themselves as one group.
Okay, wait 1 second. Did everybody hear Yitzchak's comment?
Yeah.
Okay, Yitzchak's comment was that, hey, they all came separately. Now they're identifying as a group. There is a midrash that says they entered, each one entered by a different gate. Yaakov told them specifically to enter separately so they wouldn't generate any ayin hara or whatever. All sorts of midrash reasons. That's not what the Torah says. The Torah doesn't say that. The Torah says they came collectively, and it's dealing with them as a collective entity. And that's the focus that I'm trying. Again, the Torah is dealing with the brothers as a single entity. There's no individuals here. Yosef is the only one who's the individual. He's on the one side. The brothers are all as a group of brothers. Okay, so yes, maybe they did, maybe according to Midrash, they did come in separately, but clearly by the time they get in front of Yosef, they are all together as a group. Okay. Now Yosef, again, throws this accusation of spies at them. And he says, the only way I'm going to, you claim there are 12 of you and one is not around, but one is still at home. Okay, send somebody, bring him. Otherwise, forget it. I'm going to believe you're spies. Now, it's very interesting here. He says, if you don't bring the 12 down, by the life of Paro, you must be spies. The Mefarshim want to say, if he really meant to take it, really it was serious, he would have said Chai Hashem, he wouldn't have said Chai Paro. But again, that's just a thing. Okay, so verse 17 is not part of he just puts them in prison for 3 days to think about what their prospects are. And suddenly, at the end of the third day, he brings them back and repeats this whole thing. If you're true, but he switches the terms. The original term was one of you should go and bring the other brother down. Here he switches it. One of you is going to stay as a hostage. I understand your families need food. I'm going to send you back with food for your families, but if you don't bring the other brother down, I'm going to keep one as a hostage, and he's not going to be freed until you bring the other one back. Okay. Now suddenly, as they're standing in front of Yosef, we have this internal discussion between the brothers. Now notice suddenly they've switched from being a group into being a bunch of individuals. Vayomru ish el achiv. Remember, that was the same exact phrase we had last week when Yosef shows up, when Yosef's on his way. It says Vayomru ish el achiv. Again, it's Vayomru in the plural, but it's ish. A single person says el achiv to his brother. And again, what's happening here? We have them now becoming individuals again, and almost, if you will, reliving the sale of Yosef. Wait a minute, what is that? Why does the Torah tell us that? Because the brothers are suddenly feeling remorse that they've sold Yosef. What does that have to do with the fact that they're here to buy food? They are searching they know that if Hashem is causing something to happen, there must be something behind it. They don't know that it's Yosef is the one who's accusing them of being spies and trying to orchestrate that, but they feel that Hashem is punishing them for something that may have happened, that has happened. And and it's interesting. They don't say, oh, we're guilty for selling him or for letting him be sold or for whatever it was, but aval Hashemim anachnu alachinu, we are guilty about our brother. Asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho b'tchanu eleinu v'lo shamanu. We heard, we saw his pleading, and we ignored it. In other words, he pleaded with us before we threw him in the pit. He pleaded with us to not harm him, and we didn't care. And that's why God is sending us all of this problem. And so again, if this Ish El Achiv is again Shimon and Levi having this discussion, and the Reuven says, I warned you, I told you so. Now, of course, they had no idea that Yosef was listening to their entire conversation, because their assumption was that this guy who's selling the grain clearly doesn't understand Hebrew. We can say anything we want in Hebrew. I can speak in my native tongue because these guys only speak, some other language. There was an interpreter. When they came to buy food, there was an interpreter who spoke with them Hebrew and then translated it into Egyptian for Yosef. Even though Yosef probably understood the Hebrew better than he understood the Egyptian. Well, of course, by that time, who knows how good his Egyptian was. But the fact that he had an interpreter meant that they felt free to speak, and clearly they had no idea this is Yosef. Okay. As a result of hearing them, Yosef turns away and starts to cry. He returns, and Now suddenly one of the brothers shows up by name, Shimon. Okay. Now again, the reason it's blue is because Shimon is taken, but he's mentioned, but he doesn't do anything. He is a totally passive person here in this role. Okay. And he binds him and says, okay, he's my hostage. Midrashim all explain why Shimon is the one who gets selected to be the hostage. Probably has to do with the fact that he was the one who probably actually picked up Yosef and threw him in the pit. At least that's what the Midrash want to say. Clearly, he wants to separate Shimon and Levi, as again, he knows what happened in Shechem, what they did. So you want to keep these two guys separate. It'll make your life easier. And then Yosef gives all these commands to make sure everybody has food and return their money to them. Everybody gets their money back. That's the orders he gives, but he doesn't tell them that's the orders he's given. He just tells them, okay, you'll get your food, and they go. Now again, interestingly enough, verse 27, there we have that phrase again. Now it's ha'echad. The single brother opens his sack. Who is the single brother left? There were 9 of them. What do you mean there's a single brother? Ha'echad, the one. When the Torah uses a ha, it means the definitive article, the single one, the one. The only one who could be the one is Levi, whose partner, Shimon, is the one back in prison. So Levi is the first one to open his sack and see his money at the bottom of the sack. Midrash wants to say, well, because he was busy feeding not only his donkey, but Shimon's donkey, who was carrying Shimon's food for Shimon's family. So his pack went, his local pack of food went that he had for the donkey went twice as fast. That's why he was the first to find the food. Okay, nice Midrash. Again, now he says to the brothers, okay, oh my God, not only did we have Shimon over there, but I got my money back by mistake. Somehow my money ended up in my sack. They didn't take my money to pay for the food. We're going to really be in trouble now. Okay, and everyone, what is their response? Each one says, Mazot asalo kim lanu. Okay, and here they all get very concerned about this. Okay. So they get home. They come home to Yaakov. Again, there's no spokesman at the beginning. It's Vayagidulo. They all relate to him what happened. Again, the guy thought we were spies. We said, no, we're not spies. We're 12 sons. And now he asked us to bring Binyamin down. So that's the bottom line. Dad, we got to bring Binyamin down. Otherwise, we don't get Shimon back. Okay, that's what he says. And then as they're opening all their sacks, they find out that not only did Levi have his money in the sacks, everybody had their money in the sack, and they were very, very concerned about this. So Yaakov says, you guys have really not done a good job here. You've taken Yosef is not around, now Shimon's not around, and you want to take Binyamin. Why am I having all these troubles upon me? Okay, so up until this point, as I said, we've had the brothers as a group explain to their father, and now suddenly one steps forward. Vayomer Reuven el aviv lemor. Reuven tries once again to take the lead, to take the leadership role and say, here's what we should do. However, he says what his suggestion is that Shnei Bonai Tamidim lo avienu elecha. You can take my 2 sons and kill them if I don't bring him home. No, Tol Yadi, I'll be responsible for him, and I'll bring him back home. Obviously, the way he says this is not a convincing way that Yaakov is willing, and Yaakov says, no. Yelo yered b'ni imachem. Sorry, he's not going. Achiv mate, his brother is dead. He's the only one left for my beloved wife Rachel, and if anything happens to him, that's it. I'll die. You'll destroy my life. What do I have left to live for? Okay, so with this, we see that the first. Once again, just like we had last week, Reuven trying to take this role of leadership, but doing it in a way that is not acceptable, not effective to get to the desired result. The desired result here is we got to get Binyamin there, otherwise, we're not going to get Shimon back. Okay, so the Torah then continues. The famine gets worse. Okay, nothing happens. The brothers, that's it. That point ends. And the brothers are sort of reconciled to the fact that, hey, we're going to have to wait and find a better time before we can approach Dad again to ask him to bring Binyamin down. The first time didn't work. He said flat out, we're not letting him go. So it seems as though life goes on. Barav Kaved Baruch. It's almost like
Can I interrupt?
Yes, David, yes. Go ahead.
Sorry. So just you said that Jacob said, "Why have I got all this sorrows? Why have I got
Yes.
all this trouble?" But he doesn't
Yes.
answer the question.
No, he doesn't answer the question. He doesn't. He's asking, it's almost as though he's asking God, what did I do to deserve all this?
But when the brothers ask, why is all this happening to us? They examine them. They examine themselves.
Yes, they come up with a rationale. Yaakov, it seems, is not at this point able to find anything, that he can attribute all of this to. That's a great question. Why doesn't Yaakov said, I think I screwed up by favoring one pair of sons over the other, maybe? No, there's no such suggestion in the Torah, at least, that Yaakov has any second thoughts. He just says flat out, I'm not looking for the reasons for this. I'm staying with me. That's it. That seems to be his last line of defense for his own well-being. I think he himself feels that I need this for my own mental well-being. I need to have this remnant that I can hang on to from my beloved wife. Otherwise, if something happens to Binyamin, if I send him and something happens to him, that's it. It'll be as though all three of them died on the same day.
Okay, but did he never reflect on the fact that he sent this young son alone out into the wilderness by himself to look for his brothers?
Yeah, but whether Yaakov is aware of it or not, we don't really know to what level of awareness Yaakov has about the relationship between the brothers. The Torah, again, there are lots of things that the Torah tells us, but we don't really know, do the players who the Torah is talking about know about it? Okay, the classic case is, when Yaakov, when Rivka is told what she's told, the Torah tells us what Rivka is told when she's pregnant, but there's no suggestion in the Torah that she ever shares that with anybody. Okay, we don't know whether she did or didn't. And there are other cases like that in the Torah. So we know how the brothers felt about Yosef. The Torah tells us. But whether Yaakov was aware of the magnitude of that disharmony, we don't know. We clearly don't know. So when he sent Yosef out, he didn't think he was sending Yosef into a dangerous situation. He had no reason to think that the brothers would have wanted to harm their brother.
Okay.
Okay. So he wouldn't see. I don't think Yaakov would have seen sending Yosef out alone. Now he may have thought to himself, "Wow, I made a mistake by sending him out alone." But clearly, he did not expect when he sent him out anything to happen. He's clearly totally devastated when the brothers return and say, "Oh, well, we found this coat, and here it's got bloodstains on it." He didn't. I'm not sure. I'm sure he didn't send them to the local police investigation unit to find out, okay, what happened. So he took the brothers at face value. I don't think that Yaakov was aware ever of the magnitude of the differences between the brothers and Yosef. I think that's exactly the point. The Torah is trying to focus us in on that by this Yosef here, brothers here, Yosef brothers, Yosef brothers. I think the Torah is specifically trying to let us understand it in a way that Yaakov probably didn't.
Okay.
And I think, because had Yaakov understood it, I think he probably would have responded differently to this suggestion that Binyamin go than he did at first. At least, again, if we look at it from Yaakov's perspective, that I sent Yosef, he never came back. Now I've sent Shimon, he hasn't come back. Every time I send a brother out alone, something else happens. I think I'm going to keep everybody home. We can understand that because even though Yaakov knows there's a famine, he knows that food is running out, he's still not ready to. He'd rather risk the safety, the quote, safety of starving at home or running out of food at home than the perils of the trip for Binyamin. Okay. Interestingly enough, and this is another point that I think of the Blue makes, that And there's nowhere where we find Binyamin consulted in this at all. Binyamin is almost a pawn being moved back and forth between the different players, and we don't find anywhere that Binyamin is going to get involved, other than going, but not. He does not take an active role in any of this. He is totally passive throughout the whole story. Okay. So again, the famine continues, gets worse, and the Torah uses a very interesting phrase in verse bet. It says, when they finished eating the food they brought from Egypt, which the Midrashim take as, by the way, they weren't out of food yet, okay? Because once they brought food from Egypt, they decided, okay, let's eat that, because the other stuff we have is well preserved and it'll stay a little bit longer. So let's eat the new stuff before it goes rotten and leave our stuff that we've preserved and saved and whatever longer. Then he says, when they run out of this new supply of food that they brought, Yaakov says to him, and again, he's not called Yaakov, says Aviyam, here he's just called their father. Shuvu shivru lanu ma'at ochel. Okay, guys, time to buy some more. And now we suddenly find that the group is no longer a group. The group is now split up. And we now have a new leader emerging already, although he's already sort of emerged in the previous story. Vayomer love Yehuda lemor. Yehuda suddenly steps forward and says, no. He said definitively, there's no way we're going down. This guy we had to buy the food from said definitively, you don't bring your younger brother down, don't bother coming back. If you send our brother, we'll go, but if not, we're not going. So Yehuda now takes on not just the role of speaking for himself, but he becomes the spokesman for everybody, takes on, I'm speaking on behalf of everybody, it's not happening. And now suddenly Yaakov says, why did you cause me trouble by telling me you had another brother? And now again, we go back to Vayomru, the wrong color. Oops, it's supposed to be purple. Let's see what happens when you do colors. You sometimes get the wrong color. Vayomru. The brothers suddenly now, they go back to the collective. Yehuda's no longer the spokesman. He was the spokesman. He said, that's it. But now when Yaakov asked them, why did you do this? They all answer, well, he asked us all these questions. We needed to tell him. And how did we know he was going to insist on bringing our brother down? Okay, now, again, Yehuda now again steps forth from the group and again becomes the leader, the spokesperson. Yehuda says to his father, now again, interestingly enough, he's called Yisrael Aviv. He's Yisrael, his father. It doesn't say El Aviv. It doesn't say he said to Yisrael, it said to Yisrael Aviv. Again, he's speaking to him with the respect that he deserves as his father, the respect that he deserves as Israel, but he's speaking to him directly and very forcibly. Send him with me. It's interesting that Binyamin, I just told you, he's probably in his 30s. He's still called Hanar because he's the baby. He's the baby among the children. So it's okay that he's called Nar. Send him with me and we'll get up and we'll go and we'll live and not die. Us, children, families, everything. And now here's what Yehuda says. Anochi ervenu. He doesn't say kill my sons. He doesn't say anything because remember, Yehuda's already lost 2 sons. So he's not going to go volunteer some more sons. But and obviously that wasn't a very good suggestion anyway, because killing more people doesn't guarantee. That's not strong enough. He simply says, Anochi ervenu. I will guarantee his return. Miyadi tivakshenu. I'm the one who will take personal responsibility for him. Ask me if he doesn't come back. You ask me what happened. If I don't bring him back to you and stand him in front of you, I will have sinned to you all of my rest of my life. That's again the way the Torah puts it. It seems like he's making a very significant commitment here to his father. I will have sinned to you. It's something that he's not going to take lightly. Okay, and then he says, let's get going because we got to get back. And Yaakov again says, okay, if that's the case, fine. Bring a little present, bring some of the food we've got left, some dried fruits, some dried spices, etc., etc. And by the way, don't forget to take lots of money with you. Take the money that was returned, take double in case the price is doubled since you went back down there, and go. Okay? And Hashem should bless you, should give you mercy before this guy who asked you to come back and should send your brother back. In other words, he's referring to, he wants Shimon to come back and Binyamin, and I'll have to survive till you get back with the worry and with the not knowing what's going to happen. Okay, so they take, again, you notice now suddenly Binyamin becomes a very focal point in the narrative, but he still isn't doing anything. He's just there. Notice Binyamin gets mentioned 3 times in 3 psukim, but he doesn't do anything. He's just there. They take what Yaakov tells them, and they come in there before Yosef, and now Yosef sees them with Binyamin, and he tells the head of his household, his steward, bring them to my house. They're gonna eat lunch with me. And suddenly they're brought to Yosef's house. Now suddenly what happens? Vayiru Anashim. Firstly, the group, they're now back to being a group. They're not individuals anymore. Now they're in front of Yosef. They're a group suddenly again. And they see that they're being brought not to Yosef's office where he's selling the food, but to his residence. That's not the way we're supposed to be going. We're supposed to be going that way. Why is he taking us this way? And they're worried. They say, because of the money that was returned. Notice how many times they refer to themselves as a group. Chotenu, our tax, Anachnu, Aleinu, Lakachad Otanu, Vayikshu. They approach the guy who's in charge of Yosef's house and say, please, we came to buy food. We're not spies. When we got to our first stop on the way home, we realized the money was still in our sacks, and we brought it back, and we brought more money. So the guy said, no, not to worry, not to worry. That must have been some gift you got from your God that just gave you all this extra money. I got you money when you guy came and bought the food the first time. Don't worry. And he brings forth Shimon to join them. Okay, so Shimon now again, he's mentioned, but he hasn't done anything. Shimon here is not doing anything. He's gotten out of prison and he's joined the brothers. Now we're back to a group, except that they're now not 10, we're now 11 because Binyamin is with them. Okay, they're brought as Anashim, as a group of, now, at least from the person who's bringing them to Yosef's house, they are personages. They are, an ish is always somebody who has some importance. They're Anashim. They have, they're people of stature. Yosef's invited them to a personal meal at his house. These must be some special guests. And that's why it's suddenly they're Anashim. And they get ready for the meal and they get the gift ready. Yosef comes and they give him, again, now they're back to being a group again. They give him this gift and they bow to him. Again, that key word, vayishtachavulo, they all bow to him. He asks them how they're doing. Is your father still alive? And they say, yeah, he's doing okay. And again, they bow down to him. Okay, then he has a whole interchange here with Binyamin. And he tells us all about this whole meal that he prepares and how at the meal, the Egyptians sit at one table, these brothers sit at another table, Yosef sits at the third table. And the pasuk says, because Egyptians don't want to break bread with Jews. And Rashi has a very, very interesting comment. He says, look in Onkelos and he'll tell you why it is that the Egyptians don't want to break bread with Jews. He doesn't quote what the comment is. He just says, look in Onkelos and he'll tell you. And if you look in Onkelos, you'll see, well, it's very simple because the Jews are shepherds. That means they do what with sheep? They grow them for food and for wool, etc., etc. Egyptians worship sheep. You eat what they worship. No wonder they don't want to eat with you. Okay, makes sense. Okay. And now at this meal, they are seated in age order. And they say, wait, how could this possibly be? How does this guy know so much about us? Now, some people want to say, oh, well, it means that they probably are starting to get suspicious about who this guy is. However, that does not necessarily seem to go with the pshat of psukim. They just are strange. They just think it's strange. Now, again, I don't know how well, if you had 11 brothers from a family you didn't know, how well you'd be able to put them in age order and whether you make a mistake or not. I wouldn't even try it. I personally wouldn't try it, but there may be people who have that skill, who can tell, well, he's a year older than him, and I can tell because, he's got more wrinkles, or he's got grayer hair, or his beard is longer. I don't know. I have no idea. But they're starting to wonder. They're amazed by the fact that he knows exactly how old each one is. Okay. And now ultimately we know that they plant the cup in Binyamin's sack, and they go and Yosef tells his officers to chase after them. Again, he calls them again, those guys who were here, those important guys who were here, and ask them, why did you do this? Why did you, I hear I treated you like royalty, and you've gone and tried to steal something. You tried to steal this cup, and they become a group again, and they say, how could you possibly say that? We brought all the money back. How could we possibly accuse us of stealing? Well, not only did we bring money to buy the food we brought now, we brought all our money back because you forgot to take our money the first time. Okay? And they say, if you find anything of yours in any of our sacks, the person who sacks him you can kill, and all the rest of us will be slaves to you. And Yosef said, Yosef sent his representatives, says, no, don't worry about it. If whoever finds it, he'll be a slave, and the rest of you can go home. So they all lower their sacks, and of course, where's the cup found? In Binyamin's cup, right? In Binyamin's sack, excuse me. Again, they tear their garments and they go back to Yosef's. But here's a very strange, suddenly we have a very, very strange puzzle. We've been dealing with them as we're dealing with Yosef. They are this group, and all of a sudden in Pasuk Yudal, we have a very, very strange word here. Vayavo Yehuda ve'achav beita Yosef. Yehuda and his brothers came back to Yosef's house. Why does the Torah suddenly switch to Yehuda and his brothers when all of this time we've been talking about how they're this group? They're a group. When they were with Yaakov, we understand that Yehuda took charge. Reuben tried to take charge. Yehuda did take charge. Why all of a sudden is the Torah telling us that it's Yehuda and his brothers? The Torah is already telegraphing us that Yehuda has sort of now taken over. That it's no longer the brothers. That from here on, although again we said by Yiblu they all bowed down. It doesn't say that he bowed down and the rest of them bowed down. They bowed down as a group. But from here on, it's now going to be Yehuda's show. Yehuda's now taken on the leadership, and it's never going to leave him. This is it. We're finished. We've gone through all the formative stages, whether it's going to be Reuben, Shimon, Levi. The other brothers are never even mentioned by name. The other, Yisachar, Zvulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, 6 of the brothers are never mentioned by name from the time they're born until the time they die, with the exception of when they come to Egypt and they're counted among the 70 people coming to Egypt. It's the only time those 6 names appear in the Torah other than when in Bereshit, other than when they're born and when Yaakov blesses them on his deathbed. So again, we see here that Yehuda now clearly takes over, and of course that's the stage for Yehuda's plea for Binyamin next week, in next week's parsha. So I think the point I'm trying to make through going through this whole detail of understanding the parsha is the fact that the Torah is trying to give us insight into the interaction between the brothers. And again, we have we have Yosef on one hand. The brothers seem to have immediately excluded Yosef from the discussion perhaps because of his dreams, because they saw that as him, aspiring to this role that they weren't ready to give him. And it's only through the maturity and the growth that Yehuda goes through between his suggestion and last week's parsha, let's just sell him, and this week where he now says, no, not only am I not going to sell my brother, because I can leave I'm going to take responsibility for my brother. And that is, I think, the critical components that the Torah wants us to understand, that the unity is a critical component in the Jewish people. If we are not united, we cannot stand up as a group. We cannot stand up to anything. We cannot achieve anything as a bunch of individuals. Yet, each individual has to contribute, has to stand up and be counted. And we need leaders who are going to show us the way. And I think that's why the Torah goes through such detail in this whole story. It could have just said, the brothers got to Egypt. Yaakov had to go down. That's how they got there. But this whole detail story here in the parsha of mikaytz about the brothers before Yosef, the brothers almost negotiating with Yaakov to get permission to bring Binyamin down. And then ultimately Yehuda volunteering in next week's parsha to take Binyamin's place so that he can go home, because I've guaranteed his safety, is really the final step in the journey of Jewish leadership, and shows us why the tribe of Yehuda is the one that is chosen to be the one that bears that role. But again, not to the extent that they are the most powerful, but they are the one that is going to be the most important role model for the Jewish people. And hence we all become not just Bnei Yisrael, but we become Yehudim, and we take the same name as Yehuda. And so I think the lessons of leadership are that we can't ignore who we are, but we also have to remember who everybody else is in that circle. So questions, comments, feedback. Gershon, you had your hand up. You want to make a comment?
You know, it was interesting all the deception that was going on. Not only the story of Yosef and later on, other deceptions that were going on. For instance, with Leah and Rachel, another deception over there. But even here in the story, he deceived Yaakov's sons, deceived Yaakov. Yosef deceives the brother, he plays them and doesn't let them know. So you have throughout the whole Yaakov Yosef episodes, you have so much deception. But in a way, it's they want to mind control. They are working to, in effect, control what the party is thinking by giving them false information.
Okay. Gershon said that there's a lot of things that seem to be deceptive in the way people are treating each other, almost as though people are trying to control what the other one is thinking, and by feeding them false information deliberately. Examples clearly of Yaakov in front of Yitzchak. We have it clearly with Rachel and Leah with Lavan substituting. We have it very clearly with the brothers with the sale of Yosef, and we have it very clearly here with Yosef not revealing his identity until he's good and ready to reveal his identity to the brothers, because he wants to. Again, I think if we go back and try to understand each of those individually, we might get a good perspective on why that person deceived the other, because of what they felt was doing the right thing. Okay, in other words, Yosef, let's go back to Yosef, for example. Okay, Yosef's perspective, at least according to some of them, I'm not going to say this is the only perspective, is that he needs to understand where the brothers are at. He's not ready to just say, "Oh, hi, it's me." See, when Yaakov and Esav meet, Esav comes up, he gives him this big hug, he kisses him, almost as if to say, "I'm ready to forget the past." If we look at it at face value, we forget all the commentary. At face value, he says, "I'm willing to forget the sins of the past and move forward as brothers." Yosef isn't sure his brothers are there. Remember, he hasn't seen them in 20 plus years. He has no idea what's happened to his brothers in the last year. Just like Esav had no idea what happened to Yaakov. But Esav is the one who was wrong, so he's willing to forgive it, at least it appears. Yosef isn't ready to forgive it, not because he isn't ready to forgive the brothers for what they did to him, but he's not sure the brothers are ready to accept him back in. He wants to know, are they ready to accept me back? Or do they still hate me? And what good is it? Why, if they still hate me, what good is it going to do to forgive them? We're not going to have unity anyway. So that's why, according to one school of thought, he is putting them through this whole challenge. I want to see how they're going to respond when Binyamin is in trouble. Is this the fact that they hate me only, or they hate all the sons of Rachel because we represent, the rival to Leah? No, do all the sons of Leah hate me just because I had these dreams, or do they hate me because I'm Rachel's son, or they hate all of Rachel's children? How have they matured out of that? So that's exactly what he wants to know. According to one opinion, the only reason after Yehuda's thing that he's able to reveal himself is because, okay, if he's willing to fight for Binyamin, that means maybe they're ready to accept me back also. Because Yosef says, if I'm not going to be part of the family, what good is it? Okay, I think that's his least according to one school, so I can give you 3 other schools, but not right now, that why he is going through this whole deception. The brothers are clearly going through this deception in terms of the sale, because they don't believe that Yaakov's on the same page as they are in terms of the threat that Yosef poses to the family's unity. They see Yaakov not only not understanding that, but feeding into that divisiveness that they see Yosef causing in the family back in last week's parshat. And that's why they're being deceptive. As I said, each one is not being deceptive for the sake of being deceptive. They're being deceptive because they are trying to reach the point that they feel is where they need to reach as individuals and as a collective. So I hope that answers your question, comment. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah.
David.
So Yehuda emerges as the boss, if you like. How does that?
I don't want to say boss. I want to say role model. Because I think that's what the job of a leader is.
That's even a bigger problem, because he didn't exactly act as a role model in the last Sedra when he ran off and he married a Canaanite woman and got into all sorts of troubles. Is that a role model? What happened?
I absolutely agree with you. But that's the whole point. The whole point is he grows as a result of these experiences, and that's what a role model is supposed to be modeling for us, that we will make mistakes. We are human beings, but we can grow from them. We can learn from them. And I think Yehuda, clearly, if we look at this week's parsha and next week's parsha, beginning of next week's parsha, how he handles this situation. Again, he's made a commitment. And I think it begins with it, his change begins with really back in last week's parsha, where Tamar comes and says, hey, here's the staff and the whatever it is, the signet ring of the person who made me pregnant. And she doesn't put him on, she puts him on the spot, but she doesn't embarrass him publicly. And he gets up and says, you know what? She's right. I'm the one who's guilty here, not her. Okay. And he accepts that and he says it publicly. So he's willing to admit the fact that A, he made a mistake, B, he compounded the mistake, and now I've got to do something. Now I have a chance to rectify both of those with one statement, even though I'm maybe embarrassed by it. I got to do that. So I think that's already the beginning.
All I can say is thank Hashem that it's all right for us to make mistakes.
Well, that's the point. Go back to the story of Cain and Abel. What does God say to Cain after the first time? He says, you can change, you can grow, you can fix it, but you have the ability to change and grow and learn from your mistakes. And I think that's in order to learn from your mistakes, you have to first admit you made a mistake. And that's why if we go back to the tshuva process, the hardest step is the vidui. The most important step is the confession. You have to, if you're perfect and you never made a mistake, you can't change, or you don't have to change. It's only after you realize, hey, I'm not this perfect person. I'm not as good as I could be, and I've got room for improvement, and I have to try to do it, and I have to keep trying, even if even if you fall and fall and fall again, you got to still keep trying to pick yourself up and keep trying. The opposite of what is somebody once said, the opposite of failure isn't success. The opposite of failure is not being willing to try again. That means you really have failed because you're no longer willing to try again. Or it's the opposite of failure is not success. The opposite of failure is, or whatever. The antithesis of failure is not success. It's willing to try again.
Thank you. Okay. I have to go this evening. Chag Sameach to everybody.
Chag Sameach to everybody, to you, David.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments, questions? Okay. Laila Tov to all.